In the early morning of January 5, 1943, Lieutenant Red Cochran stood at the aft anti-aircraft battery of the cruiser USS Helena, watching 4 Japanese Val dive bombers plunge toward the Gulf of Guadalcanal. His fingers gripped the trigger of a weapon carrying something that would change the course of the Pacific War forever. But this story doesn't begin there. It begins 3 years earlier, in 1940, in a secret laboratory in Washington, where a group of scientists was trying to solve a problem everyone said was impossible: how to put a radio inside a bullet. The Japanese called it an American fantasy. German engineers considered it technically unfeasible. Even the United States Defense Committee responded with a single word: impossible. But in just a few hours that January morning, 12 Japanese warships would sink without ever understanding what hit them. It all started with something an enemy admiral would have mocked as a toy: a small glass tube the size of a thumb that held the best-kept secret of the war. In 1942, the United States Navy faced a brutal problem: it was practically impossible to shoot down enemy planes. The numbers told a devastating story. To bring down a single Japanese aircraft with conventional ammunition, the American Navy had to fire an average of 2,500 shells. 2,500 shots for one single plane. The math was simple and deadly: most American ships were destroyed before they could even fire that amount of ammunition. Imagine a Japanese Val bomber diving toward your ship at 300 miles per hour. You fire a shell traveling at 2,600 feet per second. It sounds fast, but you have to predict exactly where that plane will be when the ammunition arrives. It's like trying to hit a moving fly with a stone while you yourself are on a rocking boat in the ocean. Except this fly is trying to sink your ship and kill everyone on board. Conventional shells had only 2 options: explode on direct impact or explode after a predetermined time. Both methods were useless against targets moving at hundreds of miles per hour. The Japanese knew these limitations well. Their commanders had studied American tactics in detail, and they openly mocked them. Japanese pilots flew with confidence, knowing the chances of being hit were minimal. It was a suicide mission for the American gunners, not for them. The USS Helena had been attacked 17 times in the previous 3 months. The crew fired over 12,000 conventional shells, resulting in only 2 confirmed kills, a brutal rate of 6,000 shots per plane. Something had to change, fast. In 1940, the National Defense Research Committee met to discuss possible solutions. The theoretical answer was obvious: make the shell feel when it was near the target and explode automatically. This required placing a radio transmitter and receiver inside an artillery shell. The response was unanimous: impossible. But Dr. Merle Tuve, a physicist at the Carnegie Institution, had a problem with that word. To him, impossible only meant we haven't figured out how yet. The technical challenge was massive. When you fire a 5-inch shell, it experiences an acceleration 20,000 times the force of gravity. This would instantly crush any known electronic component. Furthermore, the shell spins at 25,000 revolutions per minute. No vacuum tube of the era could survive that. It was like trying to make a wristwatch work inside a hurricane while being squeezed by a hydraulic press. Tuve's team worked for 18 months in total secrecy. They developed miniature vacuum tubes encapsulated in wax and created batteries that functioned in extreme temperatures. The result was called the VT proximity fuse, variable time, a purposefully vague name to hide its true function. The device fit into the nose of a 5-inch shell and worked by continuously emitting radio waves. When these waves reflected off a nearby object, they triggered the detonator. You didn't need to hit the target directly, you just had to get close. In August 1942, the cruiser USS Cleveland tested the new ammunition against drones. 3 targets. 4 shots. 3 confirmed kills. The Navy canceled the rest of the tests and began mass production immediately. There was a critical risk: if a VT fuse fell into enemy hands, Nazi engineers could replicate it or develop countermeasures. The decision was inflexible: VT fuses would only be used over the deep sea in the Pacific to ensure any unexploded shell would sink miles deep. Commander Deke Parsons personally escorted the first 5,000 VT fuses to New Caledonia in October 1942. Each box was marked only as -32 Malawian kwachas. There was no explanation and no detailed manual. Admiral Halsey distributed the ammunition to 3 ships near Guadalcanal, including the Helena. In January 1943, the Helena received 500 special shells. The crew was trained in absolute secrecy, told only that the ammunition worked differently and every shot was valuable. Some sailors jokingly called the devices soap dispensers because of the way the cylindrical nose looked, with small components visible through a translucent material. They had no idea of the power they were holding. On the morning of January 5, 1943, at 7:42 a.m., the Helena and other cruisers bombarded the Japanese airfield at Munda. At 9 a.m., 4 Aichi D-3A Val bombers emerged from the clouds. Lieutenant Cochrane had orders to test the new ammunition. He aimed, took a breath, and pulled the trigger. 3 shots in 6 seconds. The first shell exploded near the ocean surface, a miscalculation. The second detonated 150 feet from one of the Val bombers. It wasn't a direct hit, but it didn't need to be. The explosion scattered hundreds of shrapnel fragments in every direction. The Japanese plane caught fire and plunged into the sea. The third shot exploded near another Val, severely damaging it. 2 kills with 3 shots. The crew of the Helena was stunned. The official report stated the value of the -32 Malawian kwacha's shell could not be overstated. Meanwhile, veteran Japanese pilots began reporting inexplicable experiences, planes being downed by mid-air explosions without direct impact. Commander Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's greatest aces, noted that American shells now seemed to know where they were. Japanese naval intelligence tried to figure out what was happening, but they simply couldn't believe it. The idea of putting a working radio inside an artillery shell seemed too absurd. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto reportedly remarked sarcastically that if Americans were putting radios in shells, they must be putting entire factories on every ship. He was being mocking, but by late 1943, 87 different American companies were producing 40,000 VT fuses per day. The game had changed. Against kamikaze attacks, VT-fused shells needed only 96 shots per kill, compared to 1,200 for conventional ammunition. During the Battle of Okinawa, the destroyer USS Hadley shot down 42 kamikaze planes in 90 minutes using VT fuses. General George Patton wrote that the new shell was devastating and that a new method of warfare would have to be created. The USS Helena, the first ship to use VT fuses in combat, would not survive the war. On July 6, 1943, during the Battle of Kula Gulf, 3 torpedoes struck the ship, breaking it into 3 pieces. It sank in less than 20 minutes. But its legacy lived on. By the end of the war, over 22 million VT fuses had been produced. The Japanese, who mocked the radio inside a bullet, never managed to develop equivalent technology and paid for it with the loss of hundreds of aircraft. That small device some sailors called a soap dispenser fundamentally shifted the balance of power in the Pacific. It proved that the impossible was just a matter of perspective and showed that the greatest victories often come not from brute force, but from human ingenuity, from refusing to accept impossible as an answer. When Lieutenant Cochrane pulled that trigger, he wasn't just firing a shell, he was firing the future of modern warfare. And the Japanese never knew what hit them.